What do you think is more important? To protect the right of Americans to own guns or to control gun ownership? When asked this question, 46% of all Americans said protecting the right to own guns is more important. The Pew Research Center surveyed 1,267 randomly selected Americans with at least a bachelor's degree and found that 559 believed that protecting the right to own guns is more important. Does this result suggest the proportion of Americans with at least a bachelor's degree feel differently than the general American population when it comes to gun control? Use the alpha equals 0.1 level of significance. First, let's identify P0, N, and X. P0 is the proportion, and we are told that 46% of all Americans said protecting the right to own guns is more important, so P0 equals 0.46. N is a sample size. We are told that they surveyed 1,267 persons. X is the number of people that believe that protecting the right to own guns is more important, and that's 559. The first step is to check the three conditions. First, we have to check that the sample is obtained by simple random sampling. The problem states that the persons were randomly selected, so this condition is satisfied. Next, we have to check that NP0 times 1 minus P0 is greater than or equal to 10. Let's substitute the values, type this in your calculator, and we get approximately 314.7. This is greater than or equal to 10, so this condition is satisfied. Now we have to check that the sampled values are independent of each other, and we do that by checking that the sample is less than or equal to 5% of the population size. 1,267 is definitely less than or equal to 5% of the population size, so this condition is satisfied. Now we write the null and the alternative hypothesis. Let's write the null hypothesis first. The parameter we are testing is the proportion, so the parameter is P. And the null hypothesis always has a parameter equal to some value. And the value is P0, which is 0.46. Now let's write the alternative hypothesis. The parameter is P, and the question wants to know if the proportion of Americans feel differently, so we will use not equal to. And we use the same number in the alternative hypothesis as we did in the null hypothesis. Now let's determine what type of test this is. The alternative hypothesis is not equal to, so this is a two-tailed test. In step 3, we will find alpha, or the level of significance. We are told that alpha is equal to 0.1, so alpha equals 0.1. In step 4, you can either do the p-value approach or the classical approach. We will use the p-value approach first. Let's find the p-value using statcrunch. Let's go to stat, proportion stats, one sample with summary. Under number of successes, we will put X, which is 559. Under number of observations, we will put the sample size, which is 1,267. We want a hypothesis test for P, so we will select this option here. Now we type in the value for the null hypothesis. This is H0 is P equals 0.46. And now we select the alternative hypothesis. We have that P is not equal to 0.46, so now we press compute. And we have the p-value here and the z-stat here. Rounding to 4 decimal places, we get that the p-value is 0.1794. Now let's compare the p-value and alpha. We have that 0.1794 is greater than 0.1, and this means that the p-value is greater than alpha. So because the p-value is greater than alpha, we do not reject H0. Now let's write our conclusion. Because we do not reject H0, there is not sufficient evidence at the alpha equals 0.1 level of significance to conclude that Americans with at least a bachelor's degree feel differently than the general American population when it comes to gun control. Now let's use the classical approach. Steps 1 through 3 are the same for the classical approach, so we will start the classical approach with step 4. First, we need to compute the test statistic Z0. Recall that p hat equals x over n. Now let's substitute the values. Type this in your calculator and you get approximately negative 1.34. You can also find the test statistic in statcrunch. Now let's find the critical value. You can find the critical value on part C of table 5. We have a two-tailed test, and the level of significance, or alpha, is 0.1. So we have two critical values, and they're plus or minus 1.645. Now let's draw a sketch. First, let's plot the critical values. Anything to the left of negative 1.645 or to the right of 1.645 is in the rejection region. Now let's plot z0, which is negative 1.34. Notice that z0, or negative 1.34, is not in the rejection region, so we do not reject h0. Now let's write the conclusion. Because we do not reject h0, there is not sufficient evidence at the alpha equals 0.1 level of significance to conclude that Americans with at least a bachelor's degree feel differently than the general American population when it comes to gun control.